Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to our next chapter, that is your registration. So under GST registration, of course, it becomes an important chapter. You will get questions on this, and if your concepts are clear, there is no problem. So let's start with registration. So he has to obtain, a person has to obtain registration in every state he makes a taxable supply from. That is, even if you make 1 rupee taxable supply, you have to take registration. Of course, there are some limits specified. So only if you make a taxable supply, if your turnover exceeds the limit that we will be studying later. Hence, no registration in state where he only makes any exempt or any non-taxable supply. If he only and only makes exempt or non-taxable supply, he does not have to take registration. If there are multiple places of businesses in the same state, what did we study? We studied that he has to take registration. He has to take registration in each state. Now, sir, what if I have multiple places of business? For example, in Maharashtra, I have my place of business in Nashik, I have my place of business in Bombay, in Pune, all of these in the same state. So in such a case, you can either obtain one registration and declare one place as principal place of business. That is, either one of the place that you're doing your business from, you can declare any one of them as principal place of business, and the others will be your additional place of business. So this is your PPOB, and your others, that will be your additional place of business, that will be your APOB. Okay, separate registration for each place of business within same state. So you have two options: either you take one registration and declare others as additional place of business, or what can you do? Even though they are within the same state, you can take separate registration for each business. So you will have different GST numbers but within the same state. Got it? So that is with regards to registration. Now, sir, what are the turnover limits that you were talking about? So turnover limits they have specified. So over here, your turnover, if you are producing goods and services, if you are supplying goods and services, and your turnover is exceeds rupees 10 lakhs, if your turnover exceeds 10 lakhs in these states, that is your Tripura, Manipur, Nagaland, and Mizoram. So how do you learn these states? If in these particular states, these are your special category states. So if in these states, that is your TMNM. Okay. So how do you do this? That is M for Mizoram, M for Manipur, and T for Tripura. So make my trip. Okay, MMT. Make my trip now. So that is your Nagaland. This is how you will learn this 10 line. That is make my trip now. So M for Manipur, M for Mizoram, T for Tripura, and N for Nagaland. Got it? So this is your, if in these states you have your business and your turnover exceeds 10 lakhs rupees, then you have to take registration. In the other states, how do you learn this? That is P for Puducherry, M for Meghalaya, S for Sikkim, U for Uttarakhand, T for Telangana, and A for Arunachal Pradesh. How will you learn this? You can learn this as PM Sutta. Got it? So P for Puducherry, M for Meghalaya, S for Sikkim, U for Uttarakhand, T for Telangana, and A for Arunachal Pradesh. So your key will be PM Sutta. So first was make my trip now. Next is your PM Sutta. That is 20 lakhs again if you are supplying both goods and services. However, for all other states, your limit will be 40 lakhs if only you are supplying goods. If you are again doing goods and services both, then of course your limit will be 20 lakhs. However, if you are supplying only goods, you are not supplying any services, you are supplying only goods, then in such a case your turnover limit will be 40 lakhs. That is, up to 40 lakhs you need not take registration if you are selling only goods in all the other states. So that is your make my trip now and your PM Sutta. All these states, excluding all these states, all other states have a limit of 20 lakhs or 40 lakhs, depending on if you're doing only goods or you're doing goods and services both. Okay. Now, this scheme is not available to some people. This 40 lakh scheme that I told you about, this is not available to everybody. There are some conditions with regards to this. So it is only applicable only if they are exclusively supplying goods. This I have already told you that this 40 lakh scheme is only available if they are exclusively supplying goods. Okay, and what other condition? This scheme will not be applicable to person making supply of, that is, if they make supply of these 8 items, then they will not be allowed under the 40 lakhs. For them, the limit will be 20 lakhs only. So if they make supply of ice cream, pan masala, tobacco, aerated water, any fly ash bricks, building bricks, bricks of fossil meals, any roofing tiles, if they supply all of these, okay, so this is the exhaustive list. You have to remember this. Ice cream, pan masala, tobacco, these are easy. These were already there before also. Aerated water was also added, but these fly ash bricks, building bricks of fossil meals, and your roofing tile, that is the tile that you use on the roof. If they make supply of these, they will not be eligible for the 40 lakh thing. They will have to come under 20 lakhs limit. Okay. And it is not applicable to person require compulsory registration under section 24. So over here, as you can see, there are some people under section 24 who have to take compulsory registration. That is irrespective of whether they reach the limit or not. These people have to compulsory take registration under GST. Okay. Now, as I told you, this turnover, this limit that we studied, this is based on turnover. So you'll ask me, sir, what does turnover mean? What comes under turnover? So therefore, I've added the definition of turnover also. So definition of turnover is any taxable supplies, any exempt supplies, any exports that you're making, any interstate supplies, everything will be included in your turnover. What will not be included is the GST component. For example, if you made a sale for 100 and you charge 18 rupees GST, now for the purpose of calculation of your turnover, only 100 rupees will be calculated. That 18 rupees GST component will not be calculated. If a person has place of business, POB is your place of business. So if a person has place of business in multiple states and one of them in state with the 10 lakh limit, what did I say? That is, if you have place of business in multiple states and if any one of them business is also in the special category state, that is this 10 lakh state. For example, you have businesses in Maharashtra, then you have business in Kerala, and you have one business in Tripura. So now, since this Tripura comes under the 10 lakh limit, threshold will be 10 lakh for all. Therefore, since the other states do not come under this threshold, but since you have one place of business in Tripura, because of Tripura, all your other states will also come under this limit of 10 lakhs. Okay, I hope this is clear. Okay, now section 24, as we discussed, that some people need to take compulsory registration. So any person making interstate supply of taxable goods, what you have to remember, there are two key points here. First is this has to be an interstate supply. Interstate supply means from one state to another state. Intrastate is within the state. Interstate is from one state to another state. So any person making interstate supply of what it has to be, it has to be taxable and goods only. Remember, it is not service. Only and only if you make interstate supply of taxable. First of all, it has to be taxable, and second of all, this has to be goods. Only and only if he makes interstate supply of taxable goods, he will be liable to compulsory register under section 24. Preferable to learn these sections. I have not written the section everywhere. So therefore, places where I have written the section number, it is advisable to learn those sections and quote it in the exam. So this is your section number 24. So first point is done. Second is your CTB, that is your casual taxable person. Casual taxable person has to take compulsory registration unless he is supplying notified handicraft goods. So in such a case, if he is supplying notified handicraft goods, then his limit will be 20 lakhs and 10 lakhs as we studied in this table. Okay, so that will depend, but otherwise CTP has to take registration until and unless he is supplying your notified handicraft goods. Next is your NRTP, that is your non-resident taxable person. Then any person paying tax under RCM, that is your reverse charge mechanism. We have already done this chapter. So any person paying tax under RCM, he also has to take compulsory registration. Any eco required to collect tax at source. Eco is your electronic commerce operator. So if he has to collect tax at source under section 52, he also has to take registration. And person required to deduct tax under section 51. So the chapter that we will be doing after registration is TDS TCS itself. So therefore, this section 52 and 51 will be covered over there. So any person who has to do TCS, any person who has to do TDS, both of them need compulsory registration. Interstate supply of taxable goods, your CTP and your NRTP, both of these also have to take. Okay. Any agent raising invoice in his own name, if the agent raises the invoice, that is when he is selling to the final customer, if the invoice is raised in his own name, then in such a case, your agent has to also compulsory register under GST. Next is your input service distributor, that is your ISD. So if you remember, we did this while doing ITC. I also explained what your input service distributor means. One person gets all the input, gets all the ITC, and then he bifurcates it, he distributes it to your different units. Okay. Any unit in SEZ area, separate registration for two units in same state if one of them is SEZ. For example, in Maharashtra, your Airoli area in Bombay, that is a SEZ, that is your special economic zone. So if you have one unit in SEZ and one unit in non-SEZ, you will have to take two separate registrations even though they are in the same state. Okay. Next is person supplying OIDAR services to unregistered person. Any person who is supplying OIDAR services, these are usually people from outside supplying to India. For example, is your Netflix. So any service that is done over the internet, OIDAR services to any unregistered person, these people have to take compulsory registration under GST, that is section 24. I hope section 24 is clear. Now section 23 is some people who are not liable to register. So who is not liable to register if they are exclusively making supply of these things? So first is your wholly exempt from tax or not liable to tax. Any person who is making supplies which are wholly exempt from tax or they are not liable to tax, that is exempt from tax means because of some special notification, if that supply is exempt, then they did not take GST registration, or they are not liable to tax. Some on some items GST is not leviable. Okay, but what you have to remember, this does not include zero rated supply. That means, for example, if you remember, we have done this in our earlier chapter. Zero rated supply. What is zero rated supply? Exports and supply to SEZ. These are considered as zero rated and no GST is charged on this. So under zero rated, even though no GST is charged, they are not, they will still be liable to register. Okay, so therefore I have separately shown this as that this is not to be confused. This is not to be considered over here. Okay, so any person making zero rated supply, they have to take registration. This is the whole point. Next is produce out of cultivation of land. If any production is made out of cultivation of land, need not liable to register. Or any person on which RCM is applicable since he is supplying and the other person is the person who has to do the GST complication and everything, he does not have to do anything. Therefore, in such a case, or since RCM is applicable, he does not need any GST liability, he does not have any GST registration, he does not need to register. And last is interstate supply of notified handicraft goods. So for them, the limit of 20 lakhs and 10 lakhs is applicable. Okay, now what is the procedure? What is the procedure to get registration and who and when? So any person liable to register under section 22 or 24. 24 is your compulsory registration and 22 is based on your limit. So if any person is liable to register, he has to apply within 30 days from when he is liable to register. That is the date. The date from which he crosses his turnover, that is the date from when he is liable to register. So he has to register within 30 days. And any CTP or NRTP, that is your casual taxable person or your non-resident taxable person, they have to at least 5 days prior to commencement of business. 5 days prior to commencement of business, they need to apply for registration. Okay. Now, if your application is submitted within 30 days of when you are liable, if you submitted the application within 30 days of when you are liable, then the effective date of registration will be your date when you are liable. So even though you have submitted the application, for example, 29 days after the date from when you were liable to register, since it is within the limit of 30 days, the registration that GST government, the registration that GST department will give you, it will be from the date when you were actually liable. However, if this application is submitted after 30 days, if this application you have submitted is after 30 days, then in such a case, the effective date of registration, remember there are questions on this, therefore please focus on this. Effective date of registration will be date of grant of registration. That is when you are actually receiving the registration, that will be your effective date of registration. Okay. Now your procedure for cancellation of registration or when registration might be cancelled. So registration obtained by means of fraud, willful misstatement, suppression of facts, your registration will be cancelled. If a person paying tax under section 10 has not furnished return for financial year beyond 3 months from such due date. Okay, so under section 10, that is your composition scheme, etc. If they have not furnished return for financial year beyond 3 months from such due date, if not file return for for 6 continuous months, not conduct business from declared place of business, If issues invoice without supplying goods or services, these are basically your fictitious invoice. Avails excess ITC as per section 16, ITC which is not allowed, that also you are availing, for example, for any personal purpose or etc. Next is if you are registered under QRMP. QRMP is your quarterly return filing scheme. So if they are registered under QRMP and not furnished return for 2 consecutive tax periods, your registration will be cancelled. These are your conditions where registration of people might be cancelled because of some returns you have not filed, etc. etc. Okay, so I'm great. And this is where our chapter gets over. Small chapter, don't worry. Process for other than NRTP or person deducting or collecting tax under section 5152 OIDA service provider. That is, this is the procedure for all the people except your NRTP, your 5152, that is your TDS TCS people, and your OIDA service providers. How to apply for registration? So the first step is apply in form GST REG01. REG01 part A, you have to fill your PAN, mobile number, bank account, email, and state. Okay. Then once all of this you have done, your TRN will be generated. That is something, your transaction number generated once all details have been validated. So TRN for CTP and NRTP will be generated only once deposit made. So your CTP and NRTP people have to first make a deposit just to get a GST registration. So only once they make the deposit will this TRN be generated. Then your PO examines the application and all the documents that you have submitted. Okay, now within 7 days, they will either accept it and they will grant you the registration number. The registration number will be granted in GST REG06. That is your form number. It will be granted in GST REG06 within 7 days. However, if there are some issues, so within 7 days that they will reject. If PO is not satisfied, first within 7 days they will ask for any clarification, any extra documents if they are not satisfied. Then if you give them the documents after 7 days of verifying those documents, if the PO is still not satisfied, then they will reject your application. So they will give you 7 days more extra period to give more additional documents. Okay. And if the PO takes no action within the stipulated timeline, if the PO takes no stipulated action this 7 days, then the application will be deemed to be approved. That means they have to do this entire process within 7 days, otherwise the application will be deemed approved. Okay, now these are just some miscellaneous points that you have to remember. If exhibition is greater than 180 days, taxable person cannot be treated as CTP and they will have to obtain normal registration. So as I told you, CTP happens, your casual taxable person is a person when he goes to another state, he goes to another state from where he usually does not supply. And since you are supplying through another state, so in such a case, you do not have a GST registration in that state. So what do? You apply for a CTP, you apply for a casual taxable person. That boss, I'm not here to stay. I'm just here for some days. So please give me my CTP registration so that I can do this. So they usually do this when you are going on exhibitions to different states. So if the exhibition period is more than 180 days, the tax person cannot be treated as CTP and you will have to take normal registration. Okay. Your CTP and NRTP registration validity is usually for 90 days, which can further maximum be extended to more 90 days. So total maximum it is 180 days. So it is usually 90 days and can be further extended to not more than 90 days. Okay. Every registered person shall display a registration certificate at prominent location at every place of business. They have to show that they are registered under GST. They have to show their certificate. NRTP to submit passport copy instead of Aadhaar. If you remember over here, since they have to give all these documents instead of Aadhaar, they can give your passport. Person deducting or collecting tax under section 51 or 52 will be granted registration within 3 days from date of application. Okay, so they will be granted, since over here we had excluded our 51, 52, right? So they will be given registration within 3 days from date of application. Any changes to be made in core information, these are your core information, okay, PAN number, etc. So any changes to be made in core information, you have to apply in 15 days of change and the PO may approve it within the next 15 days. Of course, PAN number you cannot change because that is based on individual, but other things you might be able to change. Okay. For non-core information, no approval of PO required. You can, as it is, change, nothing required. PAN number cannot be amended, as I just told you. PAN number cannot be amended. If you want to amend PAN number, you basically have to apply for a new registration. There is no way that you can change your PAN number. last is amount payable on cancellation of registration. Since you have already taken some ITC, you have claimed ITC. So when you are cancelling registration, if you have any inputs or capital goods on which you have already taken ITC, of course you will have to reverse that amount back. So in respect of stock of inputs or finished goods or semi-finished goods and capital goods or plant and machinery, okay, and output tax payable on such goods, that is whatever ITC you had taken on these items that are left with you, and the output tax that is payable on such items, whichever is higher, this is the amount that you have to pay on cancellation of registration. And I hope this chapter is done. We are done with this chapter. Our next chapter is your TDS and TCS. Great. So I'll see you in the next chapter, and like the video, and let's move forward.